شكرا على الحضور وشكرا للاهتمام بقضية الأطفال في المنطقة وقضية الأطفال في اليمن. هذا الصباح معنا خالد كابلاري المدير الإقليمي لليونيسف في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا. سيتحدث عن زيارته الأخيرة إلى اليمن وآخر الأرقام عن الأطفال في اليمن.
Thank you so much, Juliette. A warm welcome to all of you this morning. I just come out of Yemen. I've spent the last week both in the south and in the north of the country and wanted to share some of hard-hitting observations. But I wanted to share with you this morning as well the impact that 3 years of brutal war and decades of chronic underdevelopment is having upon the 11 million Yemeni boys and girls. Let me thank you all, distinguished representatives of the media, for the attention you have been given to the extremely dire situation in which the people of Yemen are finding themselves, particularly the children. However, there is much more attention needed for what others have described, correctly so, one of the biggest humanitarian crises the world has ever known. In 2017 alone, we have seen children continued to be killed and seriously injured at the rate of a minimum of 5 children every single day. In 2017, we have seen the outbreak of a deadly cholera, deadly diphtheria. Many hundreds of children have been killed as a result of that as well. It is fair to say today that every single girl and boy in Yemen is facing acute humanitarian needs. 3 years of war, decades of chronic underdevelopment have done something with the children in Yemen. Unfortunately, nothing good. 3 years of war in Yemen have made the severe acute malnutrition doubling in 3 years' time. In 2015, as a result of Yemen's chronic underdevelopment, we had in Yemen with 200,000 children suffering from the life-threatening severe acute malnutrition. We had with those 200,000 in 2015 already one of the biggest caseloads of severe acute malnutrition in the entire world. Today, because of 3 years of brutal war, that caseload has doubled, making Yemen probably ranking amongst the first 3 countries with the highest levels of malnutrition. And it is important that we emphasize that because it can get worse. The threat of famine we have had in Yemen for some times is still very much there. The limited access to drinking water Yemeni people across the country are facing is still there. 2 critical contributing factors to the problem of malnutrition. We should, as an international community, together with the local heroes, the health workers in Yemen, we could be taking a moment to be proud of how we have been able to stem the cholera outbreak. After many months, unfortunately, it took us time. We could be proud that we were able, over the last few weeks, to do a countrywide vaccination campaign against diphtheria. But let us not fool ourselves. Cholera is gonna come back. In a few weeks from now, we have the rainy season starting again. So without huge and immediate investment, cholera will hit Yemeni people, Yemeni children again. The 3 years of war, decades of underdevelopment, has done more to children than the confrontation with death, life-threatening, although easily to prevented illnesses. We talk about the health crisis and the health emergency in Yemen. We talk about the famine looming around every corner. What we have talked much less about, and what was for me hard-hitting when I visited Yemen last week, is the education crisis. Today, in Yemen, compared to 3 years ago, 500,000 more children are not able any longer to go to school. Today, close to 2 million Yemeni boys and girls are no longer attending school or have had never a chance to attend school. And there are several reasons for that. One is, of course, the brutal war. We have been able to verify 2,500 schools today that are no longer serving for education purposes. Schools that have been destroyed by the brutal war. Schools that are being used for other purposes, including military purposes. Schools where now, instead of teaching, it is hosting of displaced people happening. Very important is also poverty as a reason why 500,000 children more are not able to go to school. 2 million children not benefiting from education. Today, close to 80% of Yemenis are living in poverty. I can tell you, colleagues, from wandering around in the south and the north last week, I think that this is an underestimation. But let's go with the official figures. 80% of people living in deep poverty in Yemen, not any longer able to afford the minimum expense for allowing boys and girls to go to school. I was struck last week, particularly in Sana'a, by the hundreds, thousands of children begging in the streets. I was myself UNICEF representative a few years ago in Yemen. I have never seen that reality years ago. Today it is incredibly hard-hitting. Very small children stretching out their hands for a little bit of money, for a little bit of food. So poverty behind the fact that children are not able to go to school. Parents having to make the difficult choice to send their children begging, to have their children working. Families making the very difficult choice for their girls to get them married at an early age, a mouth less to be fed in the family. Today, 75% of Yemeni girls are married before the age of 18 years old. Half of Yemeni girls are married before age 15. And don't fool ourselves. Let us not fool ourselves. Sending your child to beg, sending your child to work, marry your girl at an early age is not the choice that any Yemeni father, any Yemeni mother wants to make. It's not a choice. It is forced upon them because of this brutal war raging throughout Yemen. But it is not only access to education that is problematic. It is also the quality of education. And let me share, colleagues, with you an experience of sitting last week in a school outside of Sana'a with a group of 12, 13-year-old girls talking about their day-to-day reality at home, discussing their day-to-day reality at school. And I will never forget the moment when one of the girls, taking her textbook, threw it at me and said, "This is what we need to learn from in Yemen." Textbooks that are 30, 40 years old, while other children across the world have access to internet, have their iPads to learn from. We need to learn from this. How can we ever become the doctors, the teachers, the engineers, the political leaders that Yemen so dearly needs, so direly needs, if we need to learn from this in today's world? A question I had no answer to, but an indication of how Yemeni children are suffering the impact of war and the underinvestment in the education sector. The education system in Yemen, as the health system, is at the verge of collapse. It is collapsing. I've seen that in every single school I have visited. I've heard that from every single teacher I've spoken to. Not only is the destruction of the schools there, I mentioned you the 2,500 that are nowhere near used, but also know that the majority of the teachers in Yemen has not received their salaries for over a year. Teachers still committed to go and teach, the majority of them, again, heroes, with little or no financial returns for them. Teachers I've spoken to in the south and in the north, who are there because they believe that they should not give up, despite of what their political leadership is doing with the country. Despite this senseless, brutal war continue to rage throughout the country, they feel that there is another message important, a message of hope, and the only hope they can get across is by continue delivering that minimum of education that children are entitled to. It is a fundamental children's right. Let me conclude with a couple of asks. 3 years of war in children, three years of war in Yemen, a war on children, with thousands of children killed, 1,000 more seriously injured. The first task is a simple and a straightforward one. It is for that brutal war on children to stop. To stop not tomorrow, but to stop now. It's a senseless war from a children's perspective. No single boy and girl I've spoke to understands what this is all about. And I'm wondering if those who are fighting, the political leadership, if they know what this is exactly about. It's definitely not building a bright future for children. So therefore, once again, stop that brutal, senseless war on children. Ensure that that sacred principle of children to be protected at all moments of time, everywhere, that sacred principle that the international community embraced unanimously decades ago, that sacred principle is not any longer there in Yemen. None of the parties, none of those who have influence over the fighting parties have a single second in Yemen shown the slightest respect for the protection of children. So for that brutal war on children to stop now. My second ask on behalf of the millions of Yemeni girls and boys is equally simple and straightforward. It is a call upon the authorities in all parts of the country for humanitarian assistance and assistance altogether to be allowed without any single condition. We as UNICEF, we as humanitarian community are losing precious time, and not in minutes, not in hours, days, weeks and months we are losing discussing conditions that are imposed by all sides. Conditions preventing us from delivering humanitarian assistance. Let me give you a couple of examples. Life-threatening cholera, over 1 million people last year being affected by cholera or acute watery diarrhea. We know how to prevent it. Access to drinking water, cholera vaccination. Well, colleagues, we have spent weeks, months negotiating with parties whether or not we could get a cholera vaccination campaign done. I'm very happy that last week the authorities have decided, yes, you can do it, but we have lost precious time. We had to negotiate. Just imagine a country that is running out of water, where they are working every day, day and night, to guarantee that children, that families have access to drinking water, pumping it from deep underground. But we need for that fuel in order for the pumping to be allowed. And if we don't allow to get in fuel, we have the alternative to solar-powered systems. Well, some part of the authorities decided, no, you cannot bring in solar-powered equipment. You cannot bring in fuel. Even questions about us importing pipes, water pipes. We are losing endless time and energy and money for discussions that never should happen. Access to humanitarian supplies, the supplies that are needed to deliver against the acute needs of the population, should not and shall not be negotiated. I'm happy over the last week to see the authorities also agreeing that we could, as UNICEF, with this very, very precious support of the World Bank, start our second payment of the emergency cash transfer, giving the 1.5 million most vulnerable families a little bit of cash for them to help their children. Well, also that was questioned, whether or not we could start a second payment. We had the money, we had the people, everybody was ready. No, we needed to negotiate. There is nothing to be negotiating. The most vulnerable people, 80% of the population poor, you don't negotiate whether or not you should or should not give them a little bit of cash. So I'm happy that the authorities stepped up and finally agreed to us to also start this week, tomorrow, the next payment. But it took an incredible amount of energy, time, and money that should never have to be invested. Humanitarian access, and that's my second ask, to all the parties should be unconditional. My third ask, and that's my last ask, is coming back to education. We want the donors to continue to be very generous with the Yemeni people, to be very generous with the Yemeni children. The children are suffering the brutal impact of a war not of their making, jeopardizing their future. Because what future is there for children if you deprive 2 million of them from education? If you can't guarantee all children some quality in their education that makes them competitive, engineers, doctors, teachers. So investment in education is critical, and a call upon all in international community to continue to be generous and prioritize also the education sector. It is very often in a humanitarian crisis a sector overlooked. This cannot be, because it jeopardizes the future of children. Continue investing in education. Ensure through that investment that we can start guaranteeing to these teachers that are called true heroes, working relentlessly and for free, but at least we can compensate them and their families a little bit with incentives so that they continue with their aspiration to get the best education possible for their children. The salary issue will have to be sorted. It has to be sorted in the political negotiations. But we should not wait until the political settlement is coming on this. We need to guarantee through an incentive system that teachers get a little bit of money to continue their incredible work. Let me conclude by saying that Yemen was once called the Arabia Felix, the happy Arabia. Colleagues, there is nothing much left of happiness in Yemen. And happiness will only come back, the Arabia Felix will only come back if we invest in children. We stop the brutal war and make their education again possible. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, نفتح المجال للأسئلة. We open the floor for questions. You're very welcome to ask questions in English or in Arabic. تسألوا أسئلة في اللغة العربية، في الإنجليزي، في أي يعني لغة ممكن نوصل الرسالة فيها. فنفتح المجال. أي أسئلة؟ إذا ما في أسئلة بس ثلاث أمور. في مقال صدر عن المدير الإقليمي خالد كابلاري خلال عطلة نهاية الأسبوع عن الحروب على الأطفال في اليمن وفي سوريا بمناسبة ذكرى 7 سنوات على الحرب في سوريا و3 سنوات على الحرب في اليمن. نسخ من هذا المقال موجودة في الخارج بالعربي بالإنجليزي. بنشجعكم على قراءة هذا المقال وعلى إيجاد فصحى بالذات في الصحف أو في المواقع الإلكترونية لنشر هذا المقال في العربي أو في الإنجليزي أو في الفرنسي. هناك فيديو مصور من زيارة المدير الإقليمي لليمن. الفيديو متوفر. ممكن الحديث مع زميلتي رشا بعد المؤتمر الصحفي والحصول على نسخ من الفيديو، وبنشجعكم طبعا على استعماله على المواقع الإلكترونية أو في التلفزيون. هو فيديو ذو جودة عالية. في النهاية النص الكامل لهذا المؤتمر الصحفي رح يتوفر بعد المؤتمر الصحفي في الإنجليزي وفي العربي. رح يتم إرساله على قائمة اليونيسف. فإذا أنتم مش موجودين على هالقائمة كمان إذا بتتوجهوا لزميلتي رشا لإضافتكم على الرسالة الإلكترونية. تفضلي بس عارفة عن حالك في البداية.
رانيا الجعبري مراسلة وكالة سبوتنيك الروسية بعمان. أنا كنت بدي أسأل إنه في ظل ما قيل عن الظروف السيئة لأطفال اليمن، نحن لا نشهد حل سياسي سلمي للصراع اللي موجود في اليمن في ظل إحدى توصياتكم السابقة، توصيات اليونيسف السابقة لإيجاد حل سلمي. الآن ماذا تطالب اليونيسف بالمقابل في ظل الظروف السياسية الموجودة؟ هذا أمر آخر، كان هنالك مطالبة بالمساعدات من الدول المانحة في عام 2018، فهل توفرت هذه المساعدات بشكل جيد هذا العام؟
Okay. So it's two questions. What is UNICEF asking for, the plea for UNICEF, given the absence of a political solution which we have continuously called for, and then an overview of our funding needs and how much have donors come forward to give us funding for 2018.
Well, thank you so much for both questions. So our asks are simple and straightforward. The most important ask, in the absence of a political settlement, in the absence of a war that is senseless, let me emphasize it once again, for that war on children to continue, in the absence of that continuing, the minimum we should be asking for is that all children, boys and girls, in every single part of Yemen are reached with the minimum assistance, minimum health assistance, so in order to ensure that we can vaccinate children against life-threatening diseases. Without these vaccinations, we will see this reality of a child dying in Yemen every 10 minutes of a preventable disease. We will see that reality continuing. So access to health services, unconditional access to drinking water. Yemen is a water-scarce country. Access to drinking water was, even before the war, not obvious. Today, it is even more complicated. We are committed to help guaranteeing access to drinking water, but that should be happening without any conditions to be imposed. We of course call for the education of children, as I said. With close to 2 million children not in school today, we want children to go to school in Yemen. We are ready as UNICEF to provide everything that is needed for children to access, and not only access a school, but also to get quality education. We need to get the means to do so, and we need to get the acceptance for all the authorities that can happen without any conditions. We want the protection of children. You know, if the political leadership, the military leadership, the fighting parties, if those with influence are not able to come to an agreement to stop this senseless war, can we then at least ask for that sacred principle of protection of children everywhere, at all time, for that simple, sacred principle to be respected. As I said, for the moment, in 3 years of war, we have not seen that principle respected even a single second by all parties. So is it too much to ask what every mother, every father wants for their children? For their children to grow up safely, for them not to be targeted, for them not to be killed or injured. So simple questions from us, simple asks for us, to allow children in Yemen to be children. We are creating a generation of children growing up. The only thing they know is war. And if you make comparison with other conflicts in this region even, just realize that children are trapped in Yemen. In other crises, parents had the opportunity, a difficult opportunity, but to flee the country. Just look into the Syria crisis. 2.5 million children are living outside of Syria because the parents wanted at least to give a little bit of safety, a little bit of future, and took the bold decision to leave the country at war. In Yemen, most of the parents don't have that choice. Where to go to? There is no place to go to. There is no neighboring country where they can flee to. So people are trapped. So what we ask for those, in the absence of an end to war, in the absence of a political settlement, simply allow children to be children, ensure that children are protected, are accessing health and education, water services. On the question of funding, UNICEF is asking for 2018 alone for our humanitarian program close to $350 million. That's peanuts. Let me be very clear, that's peanuts compared to the billions of dollars that are currently invested in fighting the war. So we are asking for peanuts. Education, very important. What is needed for education? Peanuts. So, international community, you will have to decide where your priorities are. You continue investing it in weapons, you continue investing in fighting, or you invest in children. The choice is yours.
اوكي ثانك يو رانيا برجع لك بعدين بعد المؤتمر الصحفي بالعربي تفضلي نادين عارفه عن حالك بس بليز
مرحبا نادين بنبي صحفية جريدة الغد. واضح قد ايه حالة الغضب والاستياء من الأطراف الداخلية وكمان طلب من المجتمع الدولي للمساعدة. هل اليونيسف عم بتخاطب اللاعبين الإقليميين في موضوع الصراع في اليمن ربما لدعوة الأطراف الداخلية للتوقف أو حتى لإلها نفسها أن تبطل محرك للصراع؟
شكرا. You express a lot of frustration in your brief. Is your call also including the regional players? Are they part of your appeal to put an end to this conflict?
Well, thanks. And the fact that I'm watching the cameras is because I'm told to look at the camera, so not out of disrespect for you. Thanks so much for this question. Again, an important question. Frustration? My frustration doesn't matter. What matters is spending a week with those kids in Yemen, in the south, in the north, listening to their stories. You have the brightest of children in Yemen. It is devastating then to see that these children grow up in an environment where they will, if this continues, never be able to live up to what they can be and what they can bring to society. that sadness more than frustration. My voice is trying to be a voice for them. A voice that needs to be heard. Because more than 55% of Yemenis today are children. The decisions to fight a war are not made by children, are made by a few adults. But the majority of the Yemeni population is suffering big time the impact of that. So, yes, the call is to anyone. First to the fighting parties, all the fighting parties, to those with influence over them. Is that in the region? Of course that is in the region. Is that outside of the region? Of course it is outside of the region. It is about everybody with a heart for children to stop this senseless war. Wherever you are, be you in this region or outside, listen to what children have to tell you. Stop this brutal war. Invest your billions of dollars not in further fighting. Invest your billions of dollars there where the future of Yemen lies. And that future lies in those millions of bright, young Yemeni boys and girls.
Okay, thank you. أسئلة مقبلة، أسئلة ثانية, other questions? اوكي، شكرا كثير، شكرا على الحضور وعلى اللقاء.